What happens when the family you fought 30 years to find tries to cast you out all over again? I offered my dying mother a life-saving kidney, and my own sister accused me of being a glory seeker. Subscribe now because the secret I found from my forgotten childhood left them all speechless. For the first 30 years of my life, my name was Jane Miller. It was a simple, sturdy name, the kind you'd expect for a girl raised in a quiet, God-fearing household in rural Oregon by a woman who insisted I call her mother, but whose eyes never held a trace of maternal warmth. For the last 25 years, my name has been Eleanor Vance. It still feels foreign on my tongue sometimes, a beautiful borrowed dress I never quite learned how to wear. Eleanor Vance was the name of a little girl who vanished from a playground in Iowa in 1983. I am that little girl. And today, at 55 years old, I was about to find out if I could save the life of the woman who gave me that name. The hospital waiting room was a sterile purgatory, painted in a shade of beige, so bland it was offensive. It smelled of antiseptic and stale coffee. I sat perched on the edge of a vinyl chair, twisting the strap of my purse, my eyes fixed on the frosted glass of Dr. Miller's office door. For weeks, I had been poked, prodded, and scanned. I'd given enough blood to fill a small aquarium, all to answer one question. Could the daughter, lost and found, be the miracle her dying mother needed? My biological mother, Catherine, the woman whose face I had only known for 25 years, was an end-stage renal failure. Her body was giving up. The door opened, and Dr. Miller emerged. He was a kind man with tired eyes who had seen too much suffering. He held a thick manila folder, but he wasn't looking at it. He was looking at me, and a slow, genuine smile was spreading across his face. That was it. That was my answer. "It's a perfect match, Eleanor," he said, his voice warm with relief. "As perfect as we could ever hope for. You're a 6-for-6 antigen match. It's remarkable." The air rushed out of my lungs in a dizzying whoosh. A perfect match. The words sang in my head. All those years of feeling like a puzzle piece that didn't fit, of being Jane Miller, a girl with no history, no baby photos, no past. It all melted away in that one moment. I wasn't just the long-lost daughter anymore. I was a key that could unlock more time for my mother, more time for us. It was a chance to give back a fraction of the life that was stolen from us both by a lonely woman on a playground. "Thank you, doctor," I managed to say, my voice thick with unshed tears. "Thank you." My feet barely touched the ground as I walked to Catherine's room down the hall. My biological father, Robert, a tall, stooped man whose shoulders still carried the weight of a 30-year search, sat by her bed, holding her frail hand. Catherine was asleep, her face pale against the white pillowcase, her breath a shallow whisper. But she looked peaceful. I touched my father's shoulder, and he looked up, his eyes asking the question his lips couldn't form. I just nodded, a huge, watery grin spreading across my face. "It's a go, Dad! I'm a perfect match!" His face crumpled, and he pulled me into a fierce hug, his body shaking with silent sobs. Our movement stirred Catherine. Her eyelids fluttered open, her blue eyes, so much like my own, finding my face. "Eleanor?" she whispered, her voice raspy. "It's me, Mom," I said, kneeling by her bed and taking her other hand. "I have good news. We have good news. The doctor just told me I can give you my kidney. We're a perfect match." Tears welled in her eyes, spilling down her sunken cheeks. It wasn't the articulate emotional reunion you see in movies. It was just a quiet, sacred moment of tears and squeezed hands. A wordless prayer of thanks exchanged between a mother and the daughter she never thought she'd see again. This, I thought, this is what it feels like to finally come home. I stepped out into the hallway a few minutes later to give them a moment alone, my heart so full it felt like it might burst. The joy was so pure, so potent, it was almost painful. And that's when I saw her. My sister, Chloe. She was standing 10 feet away, leaning against the opposite wall, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She was born 2 years after I was taken, a child conceived in grief, who had grown up as the sole focus of two heartbroken parents. I had tried for 25 years to build a bridge to her, but she had met every attempt with a cool, polite indifference. Today, the indifference was gone. In its place was a look of pure, unadulterated venom. She had clearly heard everything. Well, isn't that just perfect? Saint Eleanor swoops in to perform one last miracle. Chloe, please, I started, my joy instantly evaporating. Oh, isn't it? She cut me off, her eyes like chips of ice. You come back into our lives like a tornado, turning everything upside down. For 25 years, everything has been about you. The reunion, the healing, the endless stories about the daughter who came home. Dad and Mom spent my entire childhood mourning you, and my entire adulthood making up for lost time with you. I thought finally, when she got sick, it would just be about her, about us, the family that was actually here. She took another step closer, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. But you couldn't stand that, could you? You couldn't bear to be the center of the story. So now you're going to be the grand martyr, the hero who gives a piece of herself to save our dying mother. You're not doing this for her, Eleanor. You're doing this so that when she's gone, everyone will remember you as the one who saved her, and I'll just be the one who stood by and watched. The accusation, so twisted and so full of a pain I couldn't begin to understand, left me speechless. I felt the color drain from my face. My gift of life, my one pure, selfless act was twisted into a sick, selfish power play. That's not true, I finally choked out. Isn't it? She sneered. You're not giving her a kidney. You're making your final down payment on a life you were never supposed to have. She turned and walked away down the sterile white corridor, her heels clicking with sharp, angry precision. I stood there, frozen, the echo of her words ringing in my ears. In the space of 5 minutes, I had gone from a daughter offering a gift of life to an intruder accused of the most monstrous emotional crime. And the look in Chloe's eyes told me this wasn't just an outburst of jealousy. It was a promise. A promise that she would fight me tooth and nail to stop this from happening. The war for my mother's life, I realized with a sickening certainty, had just begun. In the week that followed, I tried to convince myself that Chloe's venomous outburst in the hallway was a singular event, a flare-up of a long-simmering jealousy that would cool with time. I clung to the memory of my mother's tearful smile, my father's relieved hug. That was the reality, I told myself. The rest was just noise. I focused on the practicalities, more doctor's appointments, consultations with surgeons, and the endless litany of risks and rewards that came with any major medical procedure. I wanted to be a fortress of positivity for my mother, a calm harbor in her sea of illness. But Chloe was smarter than a direct assault. She was a saboteur working in whispers and shadows. Her weapon of choice was concern. I first felt its insidious effect a few days later. I arrived at the hospital room carrying a bag of my mother's favorite butterscotch candies. The door was slightly ajar, and I heard Chloe's voice, soft and soothing like honey laced with arsenic. I paused, my hand on the door. And the risk of infection is quite high, Mom. I was reading a study from Johns Hopkins, and for the donor, the recovery can take months. Of course, Eleanor is tough as nails, but she has her own life, her own responsibilities. I just worry that in her desire to help, she might not be seeing the whole picture. I would never forgive myself if something happened to either of you. I pushed the door open, a fake smile plastered on my face. Chloe looked up, her expression one of perfect, innocent, sisterly devotion. "Oh, hi, Eleanor. We were just talking about how brave you are." My mother looked at me, a new, faint line of worry etched between her brows. "It does sound like a lot, dear. It's just so much to ask." The seed of doubt had been planted, and in the fertile ground of a sick woman's fear, it began to grow. Over the next week, I watched Chloe tend to that seed with meticulous care. She was a constant presence at the hospital, always arriving with broth, magazines, or a fresh stream of carefully curated information. She never said, "Don't do the surgery." She said things like, "We need to consider all the options, and your health is the #1 priority, Mom, even if it means waiting." She was masterful. She was positioning herself as the protector, the responsible one, while framing me as a reckless, emotional intruder. The true masterstroke, however, was how she used our father. Robert had lived for 30 years with the gnawing guilt of a parent who had lost a child. He had looked away for a second on a playground, and his world had ended. Getting me back hadn't erased that trauma. It had just transformed it into a new, fragile terror of losing me again. And Chloe played on that fear like a virtuoso. He met me for coffee a few days before the scheduled pre-op consultation. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. "Ellie," he said, his hand shaking so much his coffee sloshed over the rim of the cup. "We need to talk about this. Chloe was saying she reminded me that you're not just a donor, you're my daughter. You're going under the knife, too. What if there are complications? What if something happens? I lost you once, Eleanor. I swear to God, I won't survive losing you a second time." I stared at him, my heart breaking. He wasn't being cruel. He was terrified. Chloe had taken his deepest trauma and turned it into a weapon against me. She had reframed the entire narrative. This was no longer Eleanor's life-saving gift to her mother. It was Eleanor's dangerous whim that could destroy her father. I was trapped. Every argument I made in favor of the surgery, every reassurance I offered, now sounded selfish and dismissive of his pain. If I pushed forward, I was the reckless daughter who didn't care about her father's fears. If I backed down, I was condemning my mother to a slow, inevitable decline. I felt a rage so profound it made me dizzy. The woman who had kidnapped me had kept me in a small, isolated house for 30 years. But the prison my sister was building around me, a prison of guilt and manufactured concern, felt infinitely more suffocating. I saw the full extent of her victory when I visited my mother that evening. The joy and hope that had lit up her face a week ago were gone, replaced by a gray, weary resignation. "Maybe Chloe is right," she whispered, not looking at me. "Maybe we should wait. It's too much risk. It's too much for everyone." She was giving up. Chloe was winning. She was convincing my mother to choose a certain death over a chance at life, all to settle a cosmic score I was only just beginning to understand. I looked at my mother's frail, tired face and knew that logic was useless now. Reassurances were empty. To win this fight, I had to do more than just offer a piece of my body. I had to somehow retrieve a piece of our stolen past. I had to find a way to remind my mother not of the 55-year-old stranger who was offering her a kidney, but of the little girl she had loved and lost, the daughter who existed long before Chloe's shadow fell over our family. I drove home from the hospital that night in a daze, the sterile scent of defeat clinging to my clothes. Chloe's campaign of concern was working perfectly. She had turned my gift into a threat, my love into a burden. Arguing with her was like wrestling with smoke. She was intangible, her motives hidden behind a mask of loving care. I couldn't fight her with logic. I needed something more potent. I needed a memory. My entire life had been defined by a lack of them. My first 30 years as Jane Miller were a flat, two-dimensional story, a life built on the lies of a woman who told me my real parents were junkies who hadn't wanted me. The last 25 years as Eleanor Vance had been a frantic effort to stitch together a history that didn't belong to me, to learn the names and faces of a family who were essentially well-meaning strangers. I had no genuine memories of my own before the age of 3. There was only a void. But as I pulled into my driveway and cut the engine, a forgotten conversation surfaced. Years ago, shortly after we were reunited, my father had mentioned it. A small cardboard box stored in the attic of their house. "We didn't have much left of you, Ellie," he'd said, his voice thick with old grief. "Just a few little things from your room. We couldn't bear to throw them away." I had never asked to see it. The idea of confronting that void so directly had always been too painful. Until now. Now, that box felt like my only hope. The next morning, I drove to my parents' house. Chloe's car was mercifully absent from the driveway. I found my father in the den, staring blankly at a television that wasn't on. He looked 100 years old. "Dad," I said softly, "I need to ask you for something. The box, the one with my baby things. Do you still have it?" He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a sad confusion. "The box? Of course. Why now, Eleanor?" "I need to feel something real. I need to remember." He didn't ask any more questions. He simply nodded, a flicker of understanding in his eyes, and led me to the hall closet. He pulled down the creaking attic ladder and climbed into the darkness. A moment later, he reappeared, carefully carrying a dusty, unassuming cardboard box sealed with yellowed masking tape. He handed it to me with a reverence usually reserved for holy relics. "Be careful," he whispered. "It's all we had of you for so long." I took the box to my old childhood room, the room that had been mine for 30 years, a shrine waiting for a ghost. I sat on the floor, my heart pounding, and slit the tape with my thumbnail. I lifted the flaps. The first thing that hit me was the smell, a faint, dusty scent of baby powder and time itself. Inside, nestled in brittle tissue paper, was a life I never got to live. There was a tiny, hand-knitted yellow bonnet, a silver rattle tarnished with age, a single white baby shoe, its partner lost to time. I touched each item with a trembling finger, trying to force a connection, a spark of recognition. Nothing. They were just objects, artifacts from a stranger's life. Disappointment, cold and sharp, began to creep in. And then I saw it. Tucked in the corner was a small, plush sheep. Its white wool was matted and gray with dust, and one of its button eyes was missing. It was pathetic and worn. I picked it up, and the world stopped. It wasn't a memory. It was a feeling, a ghost of a sensation, the distinct, nubby texture of the worn wool against the palm of a tiny hand, the specific weight of it. For a split second, a phantom echo of comfort and safety resonated through me, a feeling so pure and primal it bypassed thought entirely. I remembered this. Before Jane, before the lies, before everything, I remembered this little sheep. A sob, raw and guttural, tore from my chest. I clutched the toy to my heart, burying my face in its musty wool, and wept. I wept for the little girl who lost her whole world. I wept for the 30 years I'd spent as a ghost in someone else's life. But for the first time, I also wept with a tiny, fierce spark of joy. This sheep was real. My past was real. I was real. And as I sat on the floor of that attic, clutching the first true piece of myself I had ever known, I felt my resolve harden into something unbreakable. After the storm of tears subsided, a strange calm settled over me. I sat on the dusty floorboards of the attic, the little sheep held tightly in my hand. It was more than just a toy. It was an anchor, a tiny, tangible piece of evidence that the girl named Eleanor Vance had truly existed, that I had existed. The feeling of its worn wool in my palm was the first memory that was truly mine, a memory that hadn't been told to me, that hadn't been constructed from old photographs or the sad stories of my parents. It belonged to me. And it changed everything. A new strength, fierce and unfamiliar, coursed through me. I was no longer just a victim of circumstance, a passive character in my own life story. I had a history, a real one. Fueled by this newfound resolve, I turned back to the box. I was no longer afraid of what was inside. I was ready to claim it all. I carefully set the sheep aside and reached back into the box, my fingers brushing against the brittle tissue paper at the bottom. I thought it was empty, but then I felt it. Something flat and stiff tucked into the corner. I pulled it out. It was an envelope, yellowed with age, the paper soft and fragile. It was sealed, but there was no name, no address, no stamp. It was a letter written to no one and to everyone. My breath caught. With painstaking care, I worked my pinky finger under the flap, breaking the ancient seal. The sound was like a sigh. Inside was a single sheet of stationery, the kind with a delicate floral border, folded neatly in two. I unfolded it. The handwriting was my mother's, yet it was different, younger. The loops were rounder, the pressure of the pen heavier, as if written with a desperate, furious energy. The ink was slightly faded, and a small, blurred stain on the corner looked suspiciously like a teardrop. To my little girl, it began. I don't know who you are with, or where you are. I don't know if you are safe. I pray every night that you are. The woman who took you, she told a neighbor she was saving you from us, that we were bad people. One day, you might hear that story. You might be told that we didn't want you, that we didn't love you. And I am writing this into the void, into the darkness, hoping that somehow, someday, these words will find you and tell you that it is the most evil lie ever told. You were not unwanted. You were my everything. You were the first thing I thought of in the morning and the last prayer I whispered at night. You had a laugh that could make the flowers grow. You loved the little sheep your grandmother knitted for you more than anything. You would not sleep without it. I hope you still have it. I hope it is keeping you safe. Eyes flew to the little worn toy sitting beside me on the floor, and a fresh wave of tears blinded me. I wiped them away, my hands shaking as I continued to read. There is not a day that goes by that I don't search for your face in crowds. There is not a night that goes by that I don't dream of you. Loving you is the truest thing I have ever known. Please, wherever you are, be happy, and know that your mother loves you. Always has, always will, Mama. I lowered the letter, my entire body trembling. This was not a memory. This was a soul laid bare. This was my mother's heart, uncensored by time, untouched by Chloe's manipulations. This was the pure, ferocious love of a mother for her lost child. The lie I had been told my whole life, that my parents were addicts who threw me away, was crafted by my kidnapper to keep me silent, to keep me from questioning. But Chloe, in her own sophisticated way, was doing the same thing, trying to convince me and everyone else that I didn't truly belong. This letter was more than just proof of my mother's love. It was a weapon. It was the key. Chloe thought she could control our family with her whispers of doubt, but she had no idea what was hidden in this box. The family meeting she was so keen on arranging with the doctors was about to take a very different turn. She wanted to talk about risk and responsibility. Fine, we would talk. But we would also talk about love. And I was bringing the evidence. The family meeting, as Chloe had dubbed it, took place in a small, soulless conference room on the third floor of the hospital. It was a room designed for delivering bad news, with its drab gray carpet, oppressive fluorescent lighting, and a long, polished table that felt like a barrier between warring nations. Dr. Miller sat at the head of the table, looking uncomfortable. My father, Robert, sat beside my mother, Catherine, his face a mask of anxiety. And next to my mother, holding her hand in a proprietary grip, was Chloe, the picture of dutiful, concerned daughterhood. She had orchestrated this entire event, and she was radiating a quiet, confident triumph. This was her stage. Dr. Miller began, his voice professional and kind, as he went through the risks of the surgery one more time. He spoke of potential complications, recovery times, and the lifelong commitment to anti-rejection medications. Heard in this sterile, formal setting, the realities of the procedure sounded more daunting than ever. With every word, I could feel my mother shrinking, the fear coiling around her like a physical restraint. I could see the "I told you so" forming in Chloe's eyes. When the doctor finished, Chloe seized the moment. She squeezed our mother's hand and looked at Dr. Miller with an expression of profound gravity. "Thank you, doctor. You've given us a lot to think about," she said, her voice resonating with fake sincerity. "And given Mom's fragile state and the very real dangers you've outlined, I have to say, as the person who has been her primary caregiver, I believe putting her through such a physically traumatic ordeal would be irresponsible. We need to prioritize her comfort and quality of life now, not risk it all on a hopeful gamble." The final words were aimed at me. Hopeful gamble. She made my gift of life sound like a reckless bet at a poker table. My father sighed, his shoulders slumping in defeat. My mother just stared at her hands, her face pale and drawn. Chloe was about to win. She was about to convince our mother to quietly fade away, all to prove a point. That's when I stood up. I didn't push my chair back or make a sound. I just rose to my feet, and the simple act commanded the attention of the room. "Thank you, Chloe," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Your concern for Mom's comfort is admirable." I let the words hang in the air before turning my attention from my sister to my mother. But this decision isn't just about comfort or risk or even quality of life. It's about love and about fear. I reached into my purse and pulled out the small plush sheep, placing it gently on the cable in front of my mother. Her eyes widened slightly, a flicker of something deep and ancient passing through them. Then I took out the yellowed, folded letter. "I know you're scared, Mom. It's easy to be scared when all we talk about is what we might lose. But I found something this morning. Something you wrote a long time ago. And I think it will remind you of what we stand to gain." Chloe's eyes narrowed, Eleanor, what are you doing? This is not the time for theatrics. I ignored her. My world had shrunk to the space between me and my mother. I unfolded the letter. These are your words, Mom, from a time when your fear was at its greatest. And I began to read. I read about her unbreakable love for her lost little girl. I read her desperate prayers for my safety. I read her defiance against the lie that she hadn't wanted me. With every sentence, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The clinical coldness was replaced by a raw, profound human emotion. My father, Robert, dropped his head into his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent, heartbroken sobs. Dr. Miller looked down at his notes, giving us our privacy, his professional demeanor softened by a look of deep empathy. Chloe was staring at me, her face a mask of disbelief. The control was slipping from her grasp, and she was panicking. This raw, powerful emotion was something she couldn't manipulate or reframe as concern. I read the final lines, my own voice thick with tears. Know that your mother loves you. Always has, always will. Mama. I folded the letter and placed it on the table next to the little sheep. The silence that followed was immense, broken only by my father's weeping. My mother slowly lifted her head. The fear and confusion had been washed from her eyes, replaced by the same fierce, unwavering love that had bled onto that page 40 years ago. The words of the letter hung in the air, more powerful than any medical chart or list of risks. Chloe's game was exposed, but the final choice still belonged to my mother. The war of whispers was over, and the battle for her life was about to be decided not by a doctor, but by the strength of a love that time had failed to erase. My mother's eyes, clear and bright, met mine across the table. She slowly reached out, her frail hand covering mine, her touch a current of life. She then turned her gaze from me to Chloe, and then to my father, and finally to Dr. Miller. The timid, frightened woman who had walked into this room was gone. In her place sat a mother who had just been reunited with the ferocity of her own love. "Schedule the surgery, doctor," she said, her voice imbued with a strength I hadn't heard in years. "My daughter is giving me a gift. I am going to accept it." The words, so simple and so final, sealed Chloe's defeat. My sister didn't argue. She didn't scream or cry. She simply deflated, all the righteous, manipulative energy draining out of her, leaving behind a brittle, hollow shell. She stood up, her movements stiff, and walked out of the conference room without looking at anyone. The door clicked shut behind her, the sound echoing the closing of a long, painful chapter in our family's history. The week after the dual surgeries was a blur of pain, medication, and the slow, tedious process of healing. But it was a shared blur. Our hospital rooms were across the hall from each other, and for the first time in my life, I felt the simple, profound comfort of knowing my mother was just a few feet away. My father, Robert, was a constant, grateful presence, shuttling between our rooms, his face finally free from the decades of haunted anxiety. He looked younger, lighter. One afternoon, he wheeled me in my chair into Catherine's room. She was sitting up by the window, the little plush sheep I'd found in the box resting on her bedside table. The afternoon sun streamed in, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. For a long time, we just talked. I told her about my life as Jane Miller, about the lonely woman who raised me with a rigid, loveless discipline. She told me about the years of false hope and dead ends, of seeing my face in every little girl on the street. We weren't trying to reclaim 30 lost years in a single afternoon. We were just laying down new memories, one quiet story at a time, over the scarred and broken ground of our past. A few days later, there was a soft knock on my door. It was Chloe. She stood hesitantly in the doorway, her usual armor of expensive clothes and sharp confidence gone. She looked small and uncertain. In her hand, she held a small bouquet of grocery store daisies. She didn't apologize. I knew she never would. Apologies required a level of self-awareness she didn't possess. Instead, she walked to my bedside and placed the flowers awkwardly in the water pitcher. "The doctor says Mom's numbers are looking good," she said, her eyes fixed on the window. "Yes," I replied, my voice quiet. "Mine too." An uncomfortable silence stretched between us. "Well," she finally said, turning to leave, "I'm glad." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a truce. But it was an admission. A recognition that my place in this family was not something she could erase. It was a start. My last day in the hospital, my mother and I were cleared to take a short walk in the hospital's small, manicured garden. We sat together on a bench, the spring sun warm on our faces. We were both weaker, both scarred, but we were whole. She turned to me, her blue eyes, so much like my own, sparkling in the light. She said, "The woman who took you, I heard she called you Jane." I nodded. "It's a fine name. But I'm the one who named you Eleanor. Do you know what it means?" I shook my head. "It means shining light," she said, a small, beautiful smile on her face. "I think, somewhere deep down, I always knew you would find your way back to the light." I took her hand, the skin thin and soft over the bones, and held it tight. For 55 years, I had been two people. A girl with a made-up name and a life built on a lie, and the ghost of a lost child, forever 3 years old. But sitting here, in the sun, with my mother's hand in mine, I was finally just one person. Eleanor. A daughter. A sister. A woman who had been given a second chance at life, and then a third. And I knew, with a peace that settled deep in my soul, that I was finally, completely home.